This is a little bit about the platform. There are 3 different levels to this platform. There's a mobile app as well. And the basic accelerator program in there goes for 6 weeks. And from there, you also have live strategy sessions. It is virtual. We went national in 2020, and now in 2021, I have gone international with this platform. So really pleased with where we're headed. There is an option to upgrade to career coaching, and then there's another option to have it all done for you in terms of building your personal brand and managing it for you. That gets you 5 to 10 opportunities a week in terms of what pace you want to go at in terms of conversation. So big news on it is we're still holding pretty tightly to our numbers that we've seen across the year. Several years actually, of 87% of the folks that are using these techniques, the templates, the tools, the process that we're showing in this accelerator are getting into next positions when they're actively looking in under 90 days. So that's the good news.
This is a ongoing, luncheon that Patrice and I co-host together, really in an effort to help connect and elevate executives that care about career management, right? So the themes that we cover are, how to build and nurture a powerful sphere of influence or network. We try to mix it up around business, career, leadership insights. This one is a little bit more around sort of the behavioral economics piece of this, right? Sometimes this is a hidden affliction, imposter syndrome or low self-esteem, but we're going to tie it back to the way that it impacts our careers and our leadership and businesses overall. And then we also talk about just developing a really powerful and memorable personal brand and sort of mastering thought leadership within your specialty, within your special area. It's about, bringing leaders together to balance purpose over paycheck, right? Which is the overall mission. So my name is Kristin Kenton, and I know most of you, I believe, but I'm a serial entrepreneur. I run an organization called Kenton Talent Management. We serve as essentially people partners or talent strategists and advisors to business owners, small through middle market leaders, and private equity firms across the country, primarily through executive retained search, so recruiting, and also talent strategy throughout the employee life cycle. I also own another business called the Executive Women's Summit, which is a organization that's pretty exclusive. We have quarterly events, the next one of which is April 27 from 4 to 6:30. We're going to be doing that virtually. This one's for women, female leaders only at the director level and above. But we have 2 that are co-ed and 2 for female leaders exclusively. And on April 27, the next quarterly gathering, we're going to be talking about mastering influence and inspiring followership, right? So the old position power managerial hierarchies are dying. And now we're influencing and leading people in a whole new way. So if you have interest in that topic and if you'd like to come, or other female leaders in your network that would appreciate the invite, I'd be grateful. The other piece of the Executive Women's Summit is the university, which is a leadership development program for women that want to level up as human beings and leaders. So that's me.
So Patrice Barber, and I, like Kristin, I know many of you, but I do see a few new faces, and it's great to have all of you here. I am the CEO for Career Connects and a serial entrepreneur, 3 successful exits, and in 2019 decided to launch the Career Connects platform, where we're really being very disruptive to the whole hiring process, or finding a job, I should say, for the job seeker side of it. Yeah, what we discovered was that it was a big challenge to find next positions by the usual methods in terms of trying to apply on a job board. Less than 10% of people are finding their jobs that way. Or trying to work with a recruiter, because recruiters are paid by companies. And so in general, they aren't able to help you find a job either. So how do you find a job? And so we created this platform and this entire process to put the power of finding your next opportunities and planning your career and your transition back into the hands of you as the individual and the candidate. So really excited about what we're doing there, getting amazing results with fantastic people that are involved in using this platform. So we're really excited about where we're headed with it. I am also big in the entrepreneurial space. For those of you who don't know about me there, spent a lot of time as a mentor and am an investor, sit on the board of 2 privately held companies and then a couple of nonprofit boards as well. And involved with Techstars and Startup Colorado and speaker across the world regarding this really important topic of how do we change the face of employment and how do we put power back into you as an individual, into your hands, as it relates to defying ageism and getting beyond gender biases and things like that by putting you in control of this process. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And as we go along, this topic of the inner critic is really key to the whole thing about how do you get connected in with your network, of course.
But I was introduced to the concept of imposter syndrome and the inner critic when I went through Dr. Vance Caesar's Young Leaders program when I was first introduced to leadership. And that program absolutely changed my life. And it's what I've modeled the Executive Women's Summit University after. So understanding imposter syndrome and what it really is and isn't, it's commonly misdiagnosed and misunderstood. It's also unrecognized by the medical community, right? Every single one of us has probably experienced some kind of imposter syndrome moment in our life. But imposter syndrome is actually different than these moments, right? So we'll talk about that, myths and facts, stats. And then there's this interesting connection to, imposter syndrome and achievement, right? So they find that there is a higher, what's the word I'm looking for? Prevalence in high achieving populations, right? And only Dr. Vance Caesar did his dissertation on why only 8% of the high achieving population is actually truly happy and fulfilled, and what the 8% have in common, right? So anyway, and then we'll touch on how to maybe manage or address or solve imposter syndrome and this sort of negative self-talk, right? Because it can actually be pretty impactful on your life and your career. All right, so let's talk about what imposter syndrome is. And as I'm talking, if you have a different definition or, things that the way that this impacts you or how's it showed up, how is it showing up for you or others that you know, feel free to chat and we can look at that. But imposter syndrome basically is defined as sort of a collection and a persistent feeling of inadequacy, right? Despite evidence of success, right? So some of the most successful, high achieving people actually struggle with imposter syndrome, or at least minimally this negative inner critic or low self-esteem. So imposters suffer from, it's really chronic self-doubt, a sense of like intellectual fraudulence. You're going to get found out at any moment. You're tricking people into believing, you're smarter than you are or more successful than you are, right? So despite any evidence of success or proof of competence, okay, it's almost like body dysmorphia for those of you that are familiar with that. It's like you could be the thinnest person in the world, and people with body dysmorphia look in the mirror and they see somebody that is overweight, right? So any other definitions that anybody's familiar with that they want to chime in, and anything that's contrary to what I'm saying? Okay, so what does this look like? And this is where I'd like to see some chats too, because I think it looks different for different people. So this persistent self-doubt where a person believes I'm a phony, I'm a fraud, right? My talents are overrated by other people. In fact, a lot of people that have imposter syndrome think that their talents are talents that everybody else has. Like, this is just logic. Everybody should know how to do this, right? That's the kind of stuff that you'd be thinking if you might struggle a little bit with this. Also that maybe your talents are a result of luck. Like, wow, I really was in the right place at the right time here, or I'm glad that I spoke up in this meeting, or this never would have happened, right? Kind of a thing. It's like more circumstance. And again, and this is where, I mean, I personally struggle with this pretty severely. And I think you feel as though you're tricking people, like that you've made people believe that you're more talented, more successful, better than you are, right? And that your inadequacies could be discovered at any moment. And I think if you struggle with this there's a range. Imposter syndrome is on a scale. If you struggle with it on a debilitating level, it can actually impact your success as a leader and your career in general. Yeah.
Kristin, this is Jamie. I was going to say, I think I really love your point about the syndrome is different than the moments. I think
Right.
a lot of people who have moments classify them as the syndrome, and that distinction is important. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yes, it is. And that's the other thing too, because it's not diagnosed, it's not recognized by the medical community. I think a lot of us overdiagnose.
Yeah.
If we have these moments, right? We're like, oh, we have imposter syndrome. But really,
Yeah, and you have to, I was just saying, you just have to be careful that you don't turn it into a self-fulfilling prophecy,
so
right?
that's a really good point, Jamie. I mean, one instance can actually, it's like when people that struggle with panic or anxiety, if you have a panic or anxiety attack, then you become more prone to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it is important to sort of address this stuff as it's happening, right? And be pretty proactive about it. Thank you. That's a good point.
Yep.
And is the distinction you're making that the moments are healthy self-skepticism versus the syndrome is denying you opportunity, or am I misunderstanding that distinction?
Well, so this is what I think on the next slide is going to speak to, but for me, I'm not the one that says whether it's healthy or not, right? I'd actually be the worst judge of that probably. But what I think is recognizing within yourself how frequently this is happening and what is the impact that it's having. Mm-hmm. So for instance, I think all of us, even the best speakers, I mean, Patrice, for example, I bet there are moments of nerves before a big presentation, right?
Always. And it's a good, healthy thing because it makes you get on your toes and put the necessary energy and effort into it, because you don't want to be a flop. You don't want to be perceived as inarticulate, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I actually think there's a healthy aspect to it.
Exactly. In fact, that is one of the things that makes people high achievers, is this negative self-talk. So I think it's just watching where it starts to become something that controls you versus you controlling it. Like, for instance, if you were nervous about a presentation and then you decided to fake an injury or something to not do the presentation, that's probably something that you might want to start paying attention to, right? Or even if you deliver the presentation and you're so nervous that you can't articulate, what you want, and you feel that it really went poorly. Now, again, that's a slippery slope too, because people with imposter syndrome will feel like it went poorly no matter what. Right? So we have more chat here.
Folks introducing themselves.
Sorry. Thank you.
I'll manage that for you, Kristin.
Thank you, Patrice. All right, so let's talk about what it isn't and what it is, right? So I think what it isn't is actually more important because, again, all of us probably struggle with this. In fact, they say 70% of the population struggles at some point with imposter syndrome. So it's not like wondering from time to time, am I really made for this? Am I good at this job? Is this what I am meant to do? All right, that's not imposter syndrome. That's normal. Occasionally feeling like, oh, I might have bit off more than I can chew. I'm a little bit in over my head. Feeling nervous or anxious or inadequate in certain settings in front of certain people, right? I think it really, you need to look at, is it all things, all people, all situations, right? That's when it starts to become more about imposter syndrome versus these moments of just normal human behavior. Maybe even thinking, oh, I could have said that a different way, or I could have said that differently. I could have been more articulate, right? And then learning from those things and moving on. That's not imposter syndrome. What imposter syndrome looks like is, again, over 70% of the population has these imposter syndrome moments. But imposter syndrome is pervasive. It's long lasting. It's often can be a somewhat debilitating condition. It impacts maybe your emotional happiness, fulfillment. Maybe you struggle a little bit with anxiety or depression. In fact, there's some things that connect this for folks. So Although imposter syndrome impacts men and women differently, like it shows up differently, data suggests that both men and women struggle with it equally. So one of the original scientists or psychologists that discovered this syndrome used to suggest that it was actually just high achieving women, particularly in like academics. And I think there still are quite a few people that believe that only women really struggle with imposter syndrome, and that's not true. But I think that it shows up more obviously sometimes for women than it does men. Men tend to hide it in demand and control, anger, defensiveness, whereas women, it probably looks more like sheepishness, what's the word I'm looking for? Introversion. Maybe you're even verbalizing it, right? In a setting, right?
Personally dismissive.
Yes, thank you. So the other correlation is that imposter syndrome and definitely low self-esteem / this negative inner critic is way, way more prevalent amongst the high achieving population. Okay. I'm sorry. I've got to mute and sneeze. Sorry. 1 second. Patrice, maybe you could say something.
Yeah, so I think that the key part about this is being clear about the myths versus the facts here, and accepting the reality, which many of your comments sort of attested to it, that you already have a sense that there is this balance that you're trying to accomplish between feeling moments, as we're talking about it here, versus ongoing, like weekly, I would say, becomes the where you're stepping into it. It's a little too frequent when it's once a week kind of a stuff that you're doing, the self-doubt, negative self-talk. That's where it really starts to manifest poorly, both in your career and then also outside of your career, as you're trying to grow your network and meet with people and you're having coffee conversations, but it comes out a little bit Debbie Downer would be a good word for it, about yourself. So Kristin, other thoughts?
Thank you. Or Debbie desperate. So that's the other thing that can sort of start to happen as well, right?
And I could say Donnie Downer, but maybe that's more general neutral.
Maybe it should be Debbie Downer and Donnie desperate. Anyway, so there again, there's no approved sort of recognized diagnosis, but I think what is happening is it's like alcoholism, for instance. It's an invisible disease. It wasn't recognized by the medical community because I think it is invisible. It's sort of an invisible disease, and until much, much, much later. And I think imposter syndrome, whether they call it imposter syndrome or something else, will eventually become recognized by the medical community, which would be good because then a lot more people would have access to therapy and to help and things like that, right? So moving on, risk factors. So these are the things that make you more prone to imposter syndrome, right? And not just imposter syndrome moments, or although these are obviously contributing factors to imposter syndrome moments, but to the actual syndrome, right? So somebody that experiences frequent new challenges, like many of us have been promoted or gone for a new job or are interviewing for a new role. It's very common to have those feelings of imposter syndrome during that moment, right? But usually by the time you land, that goes away. For people with imposter syndrome, it won't go away for a long time after you land a new role, right? Or take a promotion. I think there's again, those pervasive feelings of, did I really deserve this? Who did I trick? Am I in over my head, right? Also, family environment. Okay, so if you grew up alongside a gifted sibling, like the kid that went to medical school, they were valedictorian, right? That can happen. Or somebody that grew up in a very achievement oriented or even competitive environment. And I think a lot of people, I see a lot of head nodding in terms of, experiencing doubts. It's interesting. I used to, when I was first hiring recruiters, when I was running recruiting for a firm in California, we used to only hire, which I didn't agree with, people that had like 3.5 GPAs or above. And we'd go on campus to recruit these students. And they were brilliant. But these students had never failed in their life at anything. They were high achieving students. And I think we see this sometimes amongst millennials, right? Is that we hire these, I don't mean to say kids, but I'm going to emphasize my point. We hire these kids and then we say, oh, they're so entitled. It's because they've never failed. They have no perspective of that yet. And then what happens is if they start to fail, they can really start to struggle, which is why we can see young, teenage suicide, frankly, is on the rise. All right, what else? So a history of mental disorders or afflictions. And again, that sounds really negative. Like we think schizophrenia, but I mean, anxiety is actually a mental disorder or affliction, right? And I think, what is it? 1 in 4, or it's even moving to 2 in 4, half of the population struggles with some sort of mental disorder, right? So people that struggle with depression, anxiety, perfectionism, image dysmorphia, narcissism actually was another one that came up as people having risk factors for imposter syndrome. And then inequity. So they actually found that people from marginalized populations, so, minorities, tend to struggle more with imposter syndrome actually than others. And I think that this may be exacerbated by discrimination and bias, not just in the workplace, but within our society, within academia. And it's kind of interesting, the research behind this. And then also, I alluded to this, but I think because this isn't really formally recognized, or there's only subcategories of this that are recognized, it's really hard if you struggle with this to get help. And also, if you're from a marginalized population, you might have less access to healthcare or support.
So Kristin, who are the kind of people who would be providing help?
So I think once we recognize this as an actual disorder, then insurance will start to cover this, right? And we will have more access to therapy that's reimbursed by our insurance carriers, right? But even like the psychologists and psychiatrists right out there, I think that they deal with the subcategories, like people that deal with depression, anxiety. We treat all of that, but I don't know that we're yet at a point where we're really solving the roots of the problem here. Right. And when you look at the risk factors, a lot of Americans have these risk factors. Like most of us have at least one. Right.
Exactly. So Deborah brought up a good question, and I think it was related maybe a little bit to kind of the myths and the facts, or where's the line to draw on this, of where is the balance between upping your knowledge base versus being the expert in the role. And I think you mean expert in the role. Deborah, is that correct? Am I restating your question there? How to balance between upping your knowledge versus being the expert in the role?
Correct.
Yeah. So
I don't, what do you mean in terms of like how to know when you need to up your knowledge versus being the expert? Sorry, Deborah, maybe you can pose the question.
Well, what I was thinking of is where's the balance between upping your knowledge base, because we're really on a technology change period right now, and being in this imposter syndrome, saying, hey, I'm not good at this, so I am evaluating where I need to go and enhancing my skill base, versus saying, I'm not good at this and I won't succeed.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, especially when you're in transition. The number one question I'll get is, should I go back and get my master's degree? Should I get this certification? Should I do this training? It's expensive, right? And particularly when you're in transition, it's like, are you asking yourself those things because you're struggling with imposter syndrome and you really don't need them? Or are you asking yourself those things because it's good? And here's the bottom line. It cannot hurt. Any kind of improvement, continuous learning, investment in your knowledge cannot hurt. I think you have to notice when it starts to build unhealthy impacts or have unhealthy impacts on your life or your work. For instance, if you're always, it's almost like, here's an analogy, people that just will tweak their resume over and over and over and over again, that's not working on your job search.
Right. I was going to say it's an avoidance. What you have to watch out for is when it becomes an avoidance, a mechanism for avoidance.
Yeah. And you'd have to be pretty self-aware to start to notice that. But I would say when you're in transition, usually that's the time that it's okay to invest in your training and go back, right? I mean, you always balance the financial commitment, the ROI of that. But I mean, what a great time to sharpen your axe. I mean, I don't think you can know too much. But to Patrice's point, you have to start to notice when it becomes like an avoidance pattern, or when you're not really having the outcomes or success that you think you should be having. Right.
I think too, a good way to judge whether you need to go back, whether you need to go and get new information or refresher information and updates on skills and things is when you look across at peers and what are they skilled in, and how is that showing up as more relevant as a person, as a candidate, as a professional, against what you have in your own set of things. So you'll have your set of accomplishments and results and things, and is it relevant enough? And where I think I see this most commonly is specifically in marketing, where it's very difficult to stay on top of digital marketing. And if you haven't done that, if you started out in branding as example, and then you didn't stay on top of digital marketing and all you know is branding, you tend to become irrelevant and difficult. It's more and more difficult to find positions that don't require the blend. And similarly, I would say in
analytics.
In analytics or in IT, if you were stuck in pre-agile methodology and you haven't adapted the language and adopted the principles and concepts, maybe you haven't gotten black belt training and things like that to become an expert, even though you might be at the C-suite level, but understanding what the people that you have working on your team should be doing and knowing and how to manage that and speaking their language. So that's where I think, Deborah, to your point, there is the matter of relevance can be determined by what are my, and maybe even younger peers, what are they doing? Like look to that piece that's maybe 5 to 10 years younger than you are at every aspect of your career, except when you're starting, then you would look up like 5 years.
You know what's funny?
No, that's a good point. Key word being relevance is you want to maintain that upward vibe, that upskilling.
Yes.
Current.
Yeah. And I also think that once you hit that sort of director or VP level, one area that I think people are not paying enough attention to their development and their axe sharpening is actually leadership. Yeah. So I think a lot of us focus too much on, like tactical skill-based training. And once you get to a certain point in your career, adaptable leadership, transformational leadership, the values alignment, the hiring for who, that's the stuff that people actually tend to ignore more than they should, right? So good question. Oops. Okay. So going back to Dr. Vance Caesar, this phenomenal man, it was called The Unhappy High Achiever, I thought, but anyway, it's actually not the correct book title. But if those of you that are interested, look up Dr. Vance Caesar. I mean, to this day is probably one of the top 5 most influential people in my life, but there are very common traits amongst the high achieving population. And I would imagine if those of you that are at the director level and above, most of you fall into this category as high achieving population. So there are very, very specific traits. So he did his dissertation. He did a lot of research. He quantified achievement in a very specific way. And he found that they have these 4 things in common. Every single high achiever in the world has these 4 things in common. Number 1, low self-esteem or a fierce inner critic. Okay, maybe it's not quite imposter syndrome, but if you're a high achieving person, your inner critic has probably helped you get to where you are today. And then number 2, confidence. So this was the thing that was really hard for me to understand. I'm like, Vance, what's the difference between self-esteem and confidence? And actually they're very different people. They're very different categories. Confidence is my belief that I will figure it out, that I will be successful. I will always find a way to make money. I will always find a way to, overcome. Okay. Self-esteem is more about, again, it's more of like the negative self-talk. It's like, you're never thin enough, pretty enough, smart enough, articulate enough. You still might have confidence that you are going to figure it out and you're going to be successful, but it's just never enough. And some of us have maybe worked for people like this. It's common in founders syndrome, people that are entrepreneurs that found companies. It's like they can't ever sort of get past this, oh, I can just delegate this. I can trust my people to do this. Like, you know, you'll get 9 out of 10 things done perfectly. And they'll ask you about the 10th thing, right? Yeah, good. That's your job on the 9 things. What about the 10th? So either we've worked for these people or maybe we are these people to some degree. Or if you could get to a healthier version of yourself, even with low self-esteem, you could be a very, very effective leader, right? So the other thing that they have in common is drive. So, you know, some people could call this ambition, you know, what's the other one? Tenacious. Yeah, right. Tenacious, right. I think it's the kind of people that they're going to stay up later to finish if they've made a commitment. They're going to go the extra mile, right? And actually, these are the kinds of people that tend to struggle with work-life balance. And then the other thing that they have in common, and this is something that really resonates with me, is they have a sense of responsibility. They take ownership. Okay. The way that I articulate this in the workplace is this is the individual that no matter the title, he's out there picking up the trash in front of the building because it reflects on him and where he works, right? They're the kind of people that say, hey, we didn't hit a deadline or goal, and I'm not going to blame that on Joe, my team member. I'm going to take that on. I'm the leader. Ultimately, it falls on my shoulders, right? So high achievers have low self-esteem or negative self-talk, maybe some even debilitating imposter syndrome, high confidence, high drive, and a good sense of responsibility and ownership. Any questions on that?
No, I think you addressed Jenny's point that the first two felt contradictory, and in fact, they are a little bit, however.
Yeah, one is almost like an external and the other is an internal, if that makes sense. Like the way I look at it is, like I have confidence that I'm going to figure it out and get it done. And you know, even if I get nervous about meetings, it usually ends up pretty well and it goes with the outcome that I was planning. But still, the negative self-talk can be pretty debilitating. You know?
So Don brings up a really good point that competition is a great motivator, or is the drive that brings success. However, how do you learn how to lose and accept something less than the best? And I would say, I'm gonna jump on this one first, and then Kristin, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. I'm gonna say it's not about accepting that your loss, and it's not about accepting something less than that is best. It's not about accepting that. It's about deciding how you're going to pick yourself up or pick your team up after the loss. It's just, how do you get back up on your feet as fast as you can and with as much energy, enthusiasm, and go juice. So it's not, I don't condone or like believe in the mental gymnastics of saying, oh, it's okay that I lost, or it's okay that it wasn't good enough. I think it's more about yes, it wasn't what I wanted, and it wasn't as well done or as perfect as a subjective word, but more importantly, what are we going to do next time, or how are we going to get there faster to focus forward? So that's my solution to it. But
I totally agree. I think the most insightful and emotionally aware people are the ones that can actually, one, admit that they lost and that they own some of that failure, okay? And that two, they learn something from it, okay? And they decide, rather than just blaming or, you know, or even worse, like just saying what a loser I am, they're going to say, okay, look, I'm going to choose to look at this as a gift. And I'm going to learn what I can from this. And I'm going to just never do this again, or do this better the next time. Right. So I don't think that it's possible to completely overcome all of this if you're a high achieving person. And that's probably good, because that's what makes you so successful. But I do think that we have to look for ways. I'm not a huge fan of people that say, well, you did the best you could. I don't know what that means, right? How do you know I did the best I could, right? The best I could compared to what? But I sort of get what they mean. Like, I know that I would never just say, oh, I don't care, I'm not going to do the best I can. So apparently I did the best I could for the information I had and the situation I was in, right? And I think that you have to start like giving yourself a little bit of grace or it can become unhealthy, you know. All right, so what are the 8? So if only 8% of the high achieving population is truly happy, what do those 8% have in common? So here's what they have in common. So purpose. So there's a story of the bricklayers. I'll do this very quickly, but there's 3 bricklayers. And the first bricklayer says, I hate this job. I'm out in the sun. My back hurts. I don't enjoy what I get paid. And I hate this job. The second bricklayer says, at least I have a job. I'm grateful. I'm gainfully employed. There's a lot of other of our buddies that are out there with no job. And the third bricklayer says, I am grateful to have this job because I am building the cathedrals and the classrooms of tomorrow, right? This is my legacy. This is my purpose. So it wasn't to him about laying bricks. To him, it was about the legacy and the future of what people were going to be doing in the buildings they were building, right? And I think that if you can't choose that for yourself within your own job, 1, you need to go find a job that you feel like that third bricklayer, or 2, you need to find the things that make you feel like that third bricklayer in what you're doing today. You know, so purpose. Vision, that's the other thing. So people that are happy high achievers, they generally have like a vision, or it's beyond a goal. It's almost like a North Star objective, to put it to Patrice's words. It's basically like, this is where I see myself. So Dr. Vance Caesar would talk about, I'm 96 years old. I'm standing on Seal Beach with my son and his wife and our grandkids and my wife. And we have this beautiful home that we own behind us, you know, that's made of all glass. So he said, think about the things that have to be in place for me to accomplish that. 1, I have to be healthy enough to live to 96 years old. So I have to take care of my body. Number 2, I have to have a healthy enough marriage that my wife is standing next to me. Right? Number 3, I have to have a good enough relationship with my son and his children that they're standing next to me. Number 4, I have to be successful enough in my career that I can afford that house behind me. Right? That's vision. Yeah. And then meaningful work is an obvious one. Energizing relationships. So there's a lot of different kinds of relationships. There's relationships that give us power. Like, I know the governor, which is an example, right? I don't, but that would be an example of, that's a relationship that gives us power. Knowing Jack Welch, knowing somebody that is a position of power. There's also relationships that give you energy, or relationships that give you joy. And usually happy high achievers surround themselves with those people, either at work or they build it outside of work, right? Within their communities. They also have an alignment of what he calls beliefs and behaviors. So our behaviors are always underlined by our actual core beliefs and values. It's very hard to change your beliefs and values. It's easy to change your behavior temporarily. But what we see with, again, let me go to the founder syndrome issue. You know, or companies that are founders of organizations, if they believe that nobody's really working unless they're watching, everybody needs to be there from 8 to 5, or we're not going to be productive or get things done. They could tweak their behaviors a little bit for a while and be like, oh, it's fine that you're 10 minutes late. The beliefs aren't ever going to probably change unless there's deep work that underpins that, right? They also have discipline, meaning that there's a rigor and a routine and a commitment with their work cadence, their workout cadence, their marriage cadence, whatever it is. And the other thing, and this seems so obvious, but it's the most important one, they're willing to review, renew, and recommit on a regular basis, ongoing basis. They're always saying, how could I have done things differently? How could I have done things better? How could I be wrong? All those things. That's what happy high achievers do. But they don't make it so that it's a beating down, or like you're such a loser, you're not doing these, or you're not doing these enough, or you're not doing this well. It's just always to be better, continuous learning, continuous improvement in a place of grace and gratitude. Any questions? Okay, so let's talk about what are the solutions to this. And this is where I'd like you guys to chime in. I mean, if any of you have ever struggled with imposter syndrome or know somebody that has, and then, you know, how we can address it, or ideas to overcome it. But number 1 would obviously be therapy. I don't think there's as much of a stigma in the therapeutic community as there used to be. I mean, I think a lot of healthy people are in therapy, and I think that that is just good practice for everybody, frankly. Meditation and mindfulness. Now, this is something that's really taken off in the last 10 years, but people are actually really starting to believe that this is all interconnected, that our health, our brain, all of this is interconnected, that if we want to be the best version of ourselves and a true high achiever that's happy, we have to take care of our body, our mind, and our spirit. Okay. Intentionally internalizing success. So again, this goes back to, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not pretty enough. You have to, from time to time, work on a gratitude list. These are the things that I do have in my life. This is the money that I am making. These are the client relationships I have. These are the friendships I have. Look at the relationship I have with my kids, my spouse, you know, to really sit down and be intentional about internalizing what is actually going well and what you are doing right. Journaling is another thing that I think that kind of getting some of that negative self-talk out. I even started a thing where I would kind of go through, here's the things that, you know, were negative or where I had some imposter syndrome moments in my day. And what are the two stories? So I always have one story that's like the negative story. But if I'm willing to have one story that I believe that's horrible, like that I am a loser, let's just say, I also have to have one that is a positive alternative. If a bad one can be true, shouldn't a good one also be true? I mean, I have to be open to that idea, right? And then practicing, like basically it's exposure therapy. If you're nervous about presentations, you need to give more presentations. If you're nervous about interviewing, you need to be interviewing more. If you're nervous about flying, you need to get on a plane. It's just the reality of it. Exposure therapy works, right? And then basically fostering a community or a support network, right? Whether it's an advisory board, you know, a friendship circle, whatever it is. Those are some really good core solutions. Any others, Patrice, or anybody else?
On the next one, we're going to talk about some real tactical, practical applications of exactly those things.
Okay, good. And then who's responsible for this? So basically, as individuals, there's nobody that's going to be more responsible for you than you. And that's the situation with your career, everything. You know, I think a lot of times when we're in transition, we actually are disheartened to find that all these people that used to call on us that we helped won't return our call anymore. Or all those recruiters that called on you when you were in the seat, now they're nowhere to be found, and it can become kind of sad. But ultimately, you have to take ownership of your own kind of mental health and your success and your job and your life, right? Organizations, though, I think are starting to realize that mental health is something that they owe their employees. In fact, there's like Health Grades. Kate Hyatt, the CHRO at Health Grades, had implemented this digital learning platform that really was addressing mental fulfillment, joy, but basically mental health is something that's on the rise in organizations. Society, I mean, I think I hate to say this, but particularly for women around their image and their brand and what we're supposed to look like, and maybe even for men stereotypically around like the money you're supposed to earn and the house you're supposed to have, and those again very traditional stereotypical gender roles. But I think that there are things that are perpetuated in our society that probably contribute to imposter syndrome at a pretty significant level. And then the healthcare community. I mean, you can't treat something that they don't recognize as something that needs to be treated, right? You know, therapy in general, those of you that have been through therapy, it's really, really hard to find a good therapist, right? You don't just interview one person and go with them. You probably have to interview lots and lots and lots of people and make sure it's a fit, right? So these are the basic constructs of addressing imposter syndrome. Patrice, you want to handle this slide?
Yeah. So career transition, a lot of you self-identified that you are passively and or actively planning a career transition. And so we have to ask, when 63% of job openings are new positions, i.e. they weren't posted, they don't actually exist anywhere yet. How do you get into those? Well, you have to network in. To network in, you can't have this self-doubting language going on. You've got to feel good about yourself, and you've got to be clear about why you would be able to add the value that you need to add. 48% of hires come from employee referrals. So again, requires you to network into that. It doesn't mean that you have to already know the employee, but you do have to be able to figure out how to connect and get those introductions. So all of these things are probably the most challenging part in one's career, is doing the thing we're very uncomfortable with, which is reaching out to new people and trying to help them understand who we are, how we might relate to them, etc. Doing that, it's why salespeople gets paid so much, because reaching out, cold calling is a difficult thing.
Sorry.
Yeah, increasing your confidence. Yeah.
Okay.
So the way that you go about this is really about defining your accomplishments with results and metrics. I just got off a conversation with another awesome individual this morning who's a COO. And to Kristin's point, brilliant guy, has done a lot of things, but because he has not been able to yet sit down and write the stories out in a way that he can, in 30 seconds, 60 seconds, really articulate it and get to the results of it, he was not getting any kind of traction in what he was in his conversations with people. He wasn't getting the second and third conversations, interviews, etc. All because he was missing that little piece there that Kristin alluded to on the happy high achiever part. So there's, to be happy about it, you do have to write down what your successes were, get those stories out there. So there's a couple of others on here. Creating and practicing your introduction, to Kristin's point, practice it, so exposure. So getting out there and doing it in a safe environment is obviously nice when you can get honest feedback about how you're introducing yourself. Somebody, technical difficulty entered the room. I don't know what that means, but practicing these things, and then start with your group that, as Kristin talked about before, your tight community, the people that are closest to you. Start with them. They are your raving fans. They're going to give you that boost of energy and confidence because they do know you. So start your networking and your outreach with them before you go to people that you don't know yet already, where it's a little bit more of a rocky place to do this. Let's go through some more of these. I know we've got a couple more. Practice, and then practice some more, and get feedback from your peers. So these are ways that you can immediately shift from being one of the high performers, which most of you are already, the high achievers, to shift over to become more of a happy high achiever. Practicing it is there, putting together your story, coming up with the different pieces that really relate to your mission, your vision, your purpose, getting clear about that and honest with yourself, and then learning to say no to those opportunities that don't really fit, to those conversations, to those people that are not energizing in your life. If they are Debbie Downers or Donnie, what did we call them? Donnie what's? Donnie,
I don't know.
Whatever's. And I have to apologize. We do have a Deborah and a Dawn on the call. This is no reflection on either.
Oh.
Please don't take that personally.
Yeah.
It's a pseudonym. It's a persona. It has nothing to do with you. And both of you are awesome, lovely people. Not at all like this. You're very positive. So these are just some practical, tips for you to think about. How can I begin to make the shift? Or if I find myself kind of sliding down the slope, one of the things I tell people to do, very similar to the journaling, is to get your star stories written down and just read them. If you're going into a coffee conversation, pull those little cards out, pull that sheet out, and remember for yourself, these are things I have done. They are the facts. They are not fiction. They're not made up. There's nothing but fact here. And so going with that kind of very firm confidence just before you go in will boost your energy like over the top, and you'll go stepping into conversations with new people with the right frame of mind. So that's,
I think it's important to that point, Patrice, your star stories, they should be the biggest business impacts that you've made and they should also represent each of the major buckets or the categories that are required of you in a role. So if you're going for a CFO job, I mean, all of you should have the best leadership story, right? The way that you build high performance teams or aligned strengths of your team to business outcomes or objectives or whatever, transformation, all of them. But maybe there should be also a FP&A story. Maybe there should be a tax story. Maybe there should be a systems and IT story. Like, you think about the stories and the categories that are most important to the role that you're either in today. If you're not looking for another role, you have to think about practicing those stories, Or certainly if you're in transition, practice your star stories, your business impact stories, but make sure that they're all relevant to the roles that you're pursuing. If you don't want to be in a big company, don't talk about managing big company bureaucracy and politics and stakeholder management. It's not a good story.